Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is Monday, the 28th day of May 2018. In the U.S., the last Monday in the month of May, they celebrate their Veterans Day. Is it Veterans? Memorial Day? Memorial Day in the U.S. today as well. I trust that all of my listeners and viewers had an enjoyable weekend. I'm not going to refer to the weather as inclement weather because whatever kind of weather we get, it is given to us by the good Lord. So we have to be acceptable and appreciative of whatever kind of weather we get. It may throw a monkey wrench into what you may have planned for the day. Sometimes you can still, if your activities are indoors as opposed to outdoors, then you can do it still. Sometimes even if your activities are outdoors, you can also have those completed as well. So I won't refer to the weather as inclement weather, but it is raining outside. I noticed when driving in that precipitation was much heavier in the Georgetown area than in the Savannah Lower Valley area. I'm not sure if it has changed since, but I say that to say to you, be cautious, exercise caution when driving on the roads. Remember, you're driving in the rain, your visibility is reduced, your stopping ability for you to stop your car suddenly is inhibited as well. So you want to give yourself sufficient distance when you're driving behind other vehicles. So you want to give yourself sufficient distance. And remember, 9 times out of 10, I may even say 10 times out of 10, if you hit someone from the rear in your vehicle, you are usually at fault because you have to be responsible for the driver in front of you as well. Despite the fact that sometimes people do some really crazy things, like they're on a roundabout, in the roundabout, and stop for traffic. They're wrong, but you also want to ensure that if you have enough distance between you and the other car, you have sufficient time to respond to any bad driving that other driver may do as well. So please be cautious on the roads. Wherever you think that you're rushing to go, unless you're an emergency vehicle, and even those emergency vehicles, police, fire, ambulance, they have to exercise caution when driving as well, despite the fact that we have to give way to emergency vehicles. They have to observe the rules of the road as well. So please be careful out there, because the life that you may save may be your own. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they rise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I'm your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, it is that beautiful Cayman Brack radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. If you don't like to talk on the telephone, email us at For The Record. That is one word, For The Record, at candw.ky, or send us a WhatsApp on 925-3261. That number is 925-3261. Don't expect us to answer that number. What we will accept from you is a text message or a voice note. If you send us a voice note, the contents of that voice note will be played during the course of the show. And if you send us a text message, we will either read it directly, or we will paraphrase what you have said. And unless you request that we do identify you when you send us a text, we will not identify you. We will just simply call it. We also ask you, when you leave a voice note, keep it clean. Please keep it clean. No curse words, no anything that would be inappropriate to be replayed on the radio. Please keep it clean. Don't send those inappropriate comments or use inappropriate words as well. Our discussion this morning, we've had our first, what they call it, a subtropical storm of the season. As a result, we see the weather that we have gotten here in the Cayman Islands. So later on this morning, we will be talking with Hazard Management Cayman in relation to the upcoming hurricane season, which of course will start on the 1st of June. So that is right around the corner as well. I know that many of you are commiserating over the fact that the winds that we had over the past few days have destroyed many of your young fruit, mangoes, young avocados, pears, we call them young pears as well. And that comes on the heels of the fact that appears that in most cases, as regards mangoes, that we have a small crop this season anyway. So having a small crop and then having the winds destroy some as well, we get the double whammy in that case. But again, it's all the acts of Mother Nature and the good Lord's doing. Nothing we can do about that, but simply accept what is there. Until our guests come, actually, I have a few emails, just got a WhatsApp as well, but I have another email also that was sent on Friday the 25th, and it had to do with the Barbados elections. And I'm going to take the opportunity to basically read that now and then respond to it. Actually, the response we got over the weekend when the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, made the announcement. It says, "Hi OC, I know you've been following Barbados' election very keenly. I'm seeing where Mia and the Barbados Labour Party took all 30 parliamentary seats. Assuming no changes after recounts or challenges to the results, how would the parliament operate with no opposition to oppose? I'm just asking out of curiosity, as I think the Barbados Labour Party totally deserves the win. Is this situation not dangerous to continued good governance of a country? Just a thought. What does the Westminster system provide in this type of conundrum? Notwithstanding, congrats to Mia on being the first woman elected to the position in Barbados. God bless and our brothers and sisters in Barbados. So we saw, and I shared the video clip with some of my friends. The Prime Minister spoke about when she announced the formation of her cabinet, the composition of her cabinet. And it's a huge one. It's a huge one, something like 30 ministers in total. Some chosen from the Senate, and there are some advisors from the outside as well. And she, of course, will also be working with their social partners in Barbados. But she did point out, and I had this discussion with a friend of mine the other day. Actually, I can say it was I had this discussion with MLA Mr. Ard McLean as well, and we both acknowledged the fact that the Barbados Constitution made no provisions for when there was no opposition, when the ruling party held all of the seats. Now, I know lawyers can look at legislation and come up with various interpretations, and at the end of the day, it is the courts, it is up to the courts to decide. But she also acknowledged that the Barbados Constitution made no provisions for that to happen. Also, the fact that the appointments to the Senate, the Barbados Constitution allows for 21 senators to be appointed. 9 of those senators to be appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister. 2 to be appointed by the Governor General acting on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. And I'm not clear because I haven't read all of it in terms of how that would be, 9 and 2 would be 11, and then another 10. I'm not sure how those would be appointed, but I will double check on that. And what she has said that she will do in this instance is they're going to seek first an amendment to the Barbados Constitution to allow for the Prime Minister to offer to the opposition party that garnered the second most votes in the election to offer 2 seats to them. If they accept that offer, then fine. If they do not accept it, then provisions will be put in place for the Governor General to then make the appointment of 2 individuals for the Senate as well. So that is the case. Now, in relation to the point that a government operating with no opposition and all of those committees in the Parliament that have oversight of government activities, one of the most important ones, the Public Accounts Committee, those are some of the challenges that the Barbados Labour Party has to face. I've seen some comments on social media that speak to the fact that if you have honest politicians, then you really don't need an oversight. But we can't assume that everyone is honest and everyone will continue to be honest. So we have to really have those elements of the legislative process in place to ensure that the whole system of checks and balances work. That's how the Westminster system works, and we have to ensure that that continues. So it is not an ideal situation to have, and it is not, I think, on some of the commentary during the course of the election, some persons referred to it as a one-party state, and I saw where that was corrected because it's not a one-party state. It is a situation where you have one party with all of the seats in the Parliament, but a one-party state is actually defined as a state where there's only one legal party. There are no other parties beside one legal party. That's not the case. So it's not Barbados nor Grenada. They're not situations where it is a one-party state. You have one party that holds all of the seats in the parliament, but that is not the definition, the political science definition of a one-party state. We have to take a commercial break now. When we return, I will continue with the conversation. I have a WhatsApp message that I will read also. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Orrit Connor. I'm joined by Mr. Simon Boxall in the studio. He's no stranger to us here in the studio as well. And I want to extend a warm welcome to you, Simon. Good morning. Welcome.
Thanks for having me along. It's good to see you.
Thanks for coming in as well. Before we come to you and we start talking about hazard management, I just have, and this person I know, it's been several days that they sent this question in, and I promised that I would answer it on Friday. Didn't get an opportunity to, so I want to do it now. It says, good morning to you all. My question is there a difference between a status holder versus born Caymanian in regards to applying for a job? Is there a first or second place by law? Can you please highlight that law on the show in regards to the section of the law and where to find it? Thank you. There is something in the law, either the law or the regulations, in relation to the priorities that should be given in terms of when considering someone for a position or when looking at work permits. And I will research that and given undertaken that I will get that answer back to the person before the end of the show. So that question is in regards to whether or not there's a first, a second, there's a hierarchy when it comes to jobs, for Caymanians. Now, Mr. Boxall, we're not into the hurricane season yet, but we have seen Alberto, I think the name is.
Right, subtropical storm Alberto.
Yep. Already creating a little bit of havoc.
Yeah, the fourth year in a row we've had a cyclone form before the beginning of the hurricane season. So June 1 obviously being the opening day officially.
And we've had some after the close of the hurricane season as well.
Right. Yeah.
I believe Paloma didn't Paloma
fall into
November
that was November 8th, no. But we've had certainly we've had hurricanes form afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of it. And 2005 as well, the year after Hurricane Ivan, we shot through the end of the season as well. But it's been happening with increased frequency.
Okay, and I know we can talk about some of the highlights rather than getting to the meat of the conversation, since we're going to have to take the break at 8 o'clock for our news. But we also note that Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon is going to be here on Wednesday, and he's coming specifically to talk about hurricane preparedness, and I think he's visiting two other overseas territories as well. Now, of course, based on the current situation and what has happened in the UK in relation to the register, public register of beneficial ownerships, I'm sure that there's going to be more on the table for him to discuss when he comes here. But certainly the main purpose of his visit is to look at the territories, see what we have in place in relation to hurricane preparedness, and talk to officials here.
Absolutely. I mean, we recently I attended along with the director of hazard management the overseas territories meeting in Miami, and they're obviously very concerned and very interested, particularly after last season, where BVI along with Anguilla and TCI heavily impacted, and so they're very concerned. They're concerned that they possibly didn't do as much as they could have done last year, and they were trying to be proactive. When we met last month in Miami, so I think the UK is certainly very interested to see that that they're as ready as they can be. Obviously, going into a hurricane season, BVI has still got lots to do, and they're in a kind of precarious position going in. But obviously, Cayman as well. Interested to see how well we're doing in terms of our preparation. Also, how able we are to respond and recover should we have to.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the UK's ability to respond, I'm certain that there were many lessons learned from last year's hurricane season. And, if I were in a position to ask the Minister for the Overseas Territories about the lessons learned and what actually has changed as far as the UK's approach to the territories. We see, for instance, the supply vessel, the vessel
Mounts Bay.
Mounts Bay has been used now in the Turks and Caicos to cover the Haitian dilemma that the Turks and Caicos are facing
with
at
refugees.
This point in time as well. So again, being diverted to do something else. That combined with the hurricane season, is there intention to have another vessel station in the Caribbean for the hurricane season?
I don't think that there is. I mean, the RFA is a fairly comprehensive vessel in terms of its ability to hold stores and respond. But should there be a need, for a relief and recovery effort, I think that there are plans to have other ships support and also possibly rapid deployment teams from the UK with possibly security if necessary, because we saw certain prisons and things. The prison in the British Virgin Islands in Tortola was breached, and quite widespread looting and things. So I think that they do have better plans than they have in the past.
Okay, folks, we've reached a time check now for 8 o'clock news. In the studio with me, we have Mr. Simon Boxall from Hazard Management Cayman. We're talking about hurricane preparedness here in the Cayman Islands, 1st of June, fast approaching. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. Simon Boxall, and I want to remind you that Mr. Simon Boxall is the acting Deputy Director for Preparedness with Hazard Management Cayman. And we're talking about hurricane preparedness. We want to also touch on the whole issue of climate change as well, because there are climate change deniers in some respects, but yet they do acknowledge other areas that and acknowledge the fact that change has taken place, but they at the same time deny climate change. So we'll talk about that as well, Simon.
I think that's a very important point you raise, that I think there's an acknowledgement that climate change is occurring. What's up for debate is whether or not it's induced by kind of human activity, things like the burning of fossil fuels. But I think generally it's accepted that change is occurring, sea levels rising, and we think it's risen since 1870 by about 7.5 inches, and the predictions or the forecasts vary, which is again problematic for what we're looking at in terms of the next 80 years. But 2 feet is kind of considered the range, possibly the low range right now of rising sea, which matters obviously for us with our sea level only being 7 feet above sea level on average here in Grand Cayman. It could have quite serious impacts So at a certain point, I mean, I think it's an issue because it sort of creeps up on you. Literally, it creeps up on you, and at what point do you start, trying to adapt and change based on the increasing levels of threat?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what we're seeing also is in Florida recently, they just issued a $400 million cat bond because in parts of Miami, the actual sea is coming up to the point where it's covering up the roads, so people are driving in salt water. So they've now, this $400 million bond has been issued, and they're installing pumps. They've installed 30 pumps so far to push the salt water back into Biscayne Bay. They're going to put another 60 pumps in, and they're raising the roads up to 5 feet above sea level in quite significant areas. In some areas, I mean, the road is actually higher than the sidewalks. So in South Beach, they're actually lifting the roads up right now because the sea is just, coming up, and it's a problem. I mean, cars don't like salt water.
Nor bicycles.
Nor bicycles. So it's, I mean, I think we can see with the, you hear all the reports of the retreating ice, and it's almost, it's almost incontrovertible that the sea is coming up. Like I said, the question is it caused by man, burning fossil fuels? But I think either way, the fact is that at some point we're going to start to have to discuss the issue of the rising sea level, because that could have an impact on us here because we're so low-lying, and that would cause increased problems with storm surge, and then also could affect the water lenses. But also in a warming climate, if that's indeed occurring, there's a potential for more frequent and stronger hurricanes.
And how quickly we forget here in the Cayman Islands, after Hurricane Ivan, a lot of those beachfront properties that were destroyed, they just simply were left fallow. No one built on them, and then all of a sudden we see an upsurge again in building near the water. So we really haven't learned our lessons, and I don't think, like you're saying, that we're now cognizant of the threat of rising sea levels, as well.
Right. I think some people are looking at, reaching a point where if you live on the coast, you've just got to kind of accept the reality that eventually the sea is going to enter your home, whether it be in a storm. Hopefully, I mean, not sea level rise, but probably the reality is that eventually a storm is going to probably wash through the ground floor, unless you're significantly elevated. Saltwater inundation is going to be a reality over the next 40 to 50 years. I mean, I think probably less than 10% of the properties in Cayman are built to withstand a 1 in 1,000 year hurricane type event. Maybe, probably less than 10% can withstand 1 in 100 year event. So the majority of properties probably in Cayman will face a significant impact from a hurricane, I think, within the next 100 years. I think probably 80-90% of properties can be potentially quite seriously impacted by a strong hurricane within the next 100 years, I think is the reality. But I think what people are looking at now is wash through ground floors, where the sea can just kind of flow through, and you kind of sacrifice the ground floor if you're living on the coast. But as you did point out, a lot of the properties after Ivan remained fallow for a number of years. I think 6 of our hotel properties have never really properly, didn't reopen. Indies Suites, we saw a lot of damage at Hyatt, Sleep Inn. There was one out in East End, Cayman Dive Lodge.
Yes.
There were a number of these hotels that just didn't reopen, and obviously these hotels have huge implications for our economy. And we're seeing BVI is now building, trying to, we want to be able to compete with our neighbors, and BVI is putting some of the electrical systems underground. I think even this weekend we had a a power line come down in East End.
Yep, near the blowholes, yes.
And it wasn't really that strong, the wind, but if we can bounce back quicker, I mean, we've ended up being the beneficiaries for a terrible situation for some of the other islands last year because of their impacts in the hurricanes, and their recovery process has been slow. I think it's important that we are able to bounce back and recover, fairly quickly, because the impacts on our economy can be so extensive that we have to build resilience, particularly for our critical infrastructure, and get our economy back up and running as quickly as possible.
Now, I know your expertise is more in the infrastructural side of things, but also we have to build and maintain the capacity from a financial standpoint as well.
In terms of not putting in so many sort of costs and impediments that it becomes too difficult to build, is that
would be part of that would be part of it, as well as ensuring that we have the financial capital available in terms of proper insurance, insurance companies doing business in the Cayman Islands that are reputable and that will stick to the terms of whatever contractual arrangements they have with insured parties, and not, find flimsy excuses for not honoring claims afterwards. The government having sufficient reserves in the coffers to ensure that assistance can be given. I cringe when I look at the BVI and what they have to go through to get loans from the UK government, and the strings, attached to it. They had to fight off the UK wanting to have control over any agency that is established, and of course that has historical roots as well. Simply because when you do have corrupt politicians, then you just don't give money to them, hand it to them and say, here, do what you want with it. So there has to be some control over that. So we can be our own enemies, of sorts. And it is extremely important in the Cayman Islands that we have those structures in place that we can tap into when there is a disaster, natural disaster.
Yeah. I mean, I do think in many respects, Cayman is quite far ahead in a lot of areas. We do have some prudent reserves set aside, but yeah, I mean, we would not want to be dictated to in terms of, if we're looking to get back on our feet, exactly how we go about spending the money and getting loans, like you say. That's problematic. But it's certainly an issue.
Okay. Ms. Susan says, let's take a break now. When we return, the conversation will continue with Mr. Simon Boxall, who is the acting Deputy Director for Preparedness at Hazard Management Cayman. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning is the Acting Deputy Director for Preparedness at Hazard Management Cayman, Mr. Simon Boxall. We're talking about hurricane preparedness here in the Cayman Islands. We're talking about climate change as well, a topic that does not get a whole lot of attention in the Cayman Islands. And sometimes we have a tendency to be a little lagging behind a little bit when it comes to important issues, and then afterwards we end up having to play catch up, as well. So it is certainly important that we continue the dialogue along the lines of climate change as well. But before we go back to that, I want to switch gears and go back to my favorite target in some instances, and that is the UK, and the fact that Lord Ahmad, will be coming to the Cayman Islands. Just recently, I think many people in the Cayman Islands were very attentive to the debates taking place in the UK Parliament. That is in the House of Commons and the House of Lords when it came to the sanctions and anti-money laundering bill. And we heard various utterances from members of both chambers in relation to the overseas territories and their quote-unquote expertise about the overseas territories. Some had been to them. Some have family who work in the Cayman Islands and other overseas territories. Some belong to all party groups that assist and speak on behalf of the overseas territories as well. And some have never, ever been to the Cayman Islands and know absolutely nothing about the Cayman Islands. Is it possible that we have a similar situation when it comes to the issue of natural disasters, that they don't know enough? They learn from experience, and as a result of that, we end up learning the hard way because we are the ones who end up feeling the pain because of their inexperience and their unfamiliarity with the overseas territories.
I think it's certainly an interesting point and an interesting question. And I think when we were at this overseas territories meeting in Miami last month, there definitely was a willingness and a desire to help. But I think part of the problem is that, the FCO has a mechanism where every 3 years they effectively rotate their staff. So they don't have the opportunity, I think, to build up, the relationships. Once the knowledge is there almost, then they're off to some other assignment. And that kind of showed. I've got to be honest with you. When we were at that meeting in Miami, it was almost as if they were there to kind of observe, how the overseas territories were doing, and they weren't probably as aware as they could have been about, the level of work that's really gone into planning and preparing for natural disasters. And a lot of us representing the overseas territories were actually really more interested in how the UK could fit into our mechanisms, what they could bring to the table and what sort of assistance they could provide. And I don't know that they were really ready for that when we were at this meeting. They were there kind of to observe how well we were doing or whatever and see, but that's important too. But we'd also like to know, what we can expect from the UK in terms of support. They've often said that, they're there for external affairs and also to support for, disaster response efforts and things like that. And I hope this year that they're actually we've got the Mounts Bay coming, we're actually going to start to hopefully build the relationships and actually figure out what they can bring to the table, because it's not totally clear. And it's difficult when you can't really make plans when you don't know what to expect. And if they want to be true partners with us, then I think we need to have a better understanding of what each of us are doing.
Yeah. Well, I think the history of hurricanes and the record so far tells us that in most instances, if we get hit by a hurricane here in the Cayman Islands, more than likely some of our Eastern Caribbean friends and neighbors, those countries, are going to be hit as well. What we know has happened in the past is that if the Mounts Bay or any other vessel has to render assistance to those other countries in the Eastern Caribbean, then there simply isn't enough
supplies on board on the ship
for them when they get to the Cayman Islands.
Right.
What are there any contingency plans to cover that area? And while I still have the mic, I'd also like to make this observation as well. The UK speaks about this quote unquote special relationship with the U.S.
The UK overseas territories.
Right. Well,
Right.
well, the UK,
And the US.
yeah,
Okay.
the UK has a special relationship with the US from a political
Right.
standpoint. Their prime ministers and presidents have always been close. We see them collaborating when it comes to war.
Right.
Right,
Well,
Iraq and everywhere else. Why is it that they can't collaborate in these particular instances and make arrangements with the U.S. because we're so close to them for that assistance to come from the U.S.? If you can do it in war, why can't you do it in peace?
that's a great question. I mean, they are actually trying to build relationships with the Dutch and the French overseas territories at the moment, the UK, but it's an interesting question. And one of the areas I think that would be of great assistance to us is, the globe is kind of divided up into different areas meteorologically, and the US, Miami in particular, National Hurricane Center, is responsible for the Caribbean region. But we're seeing that the US government is issuing products for storm surge products for US coastal states and US islands only. So we're not able to really forecast properly approaching storm surge when we get a hurricane approaching. We don't know, we can't tell our citizens, Mr. Connor, the sea's going to come 5-6 feet up the wall of your house, because we're not getting those products from the US. And the UK Met is not offering those products, and we're not able to do it here ourselves at the present time. But you'd think that that would be an instance where maybe the UK could, the clear gap, people's lives are at risk in the overseas territories. Like you say, they managed to work together fairly effectively for military purposes, but this might be a great area where, in peacetime, it would be a very great benefit to us to be able to accurately forecast storm surge.
Certainly. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. O.C.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning.
Good morning to Mr. Boxall.
Morning. Good to hear you.
And this is Georgia Levi.
Morning, Miss Georgia.
Both of you men are much, much too young to know about the many, many reasons why Caymanians did not build their houses in the water.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I remember quite a number of years ago, I think that the couple was, or the people who were planning on building a house were Americans, and they were talking to an old Cayman man, and the couple kept saying to the old man, "Oh, you people here in Cayman, you all building practically way inland, almost in the bush, and all this beautiful beach land here." And the old gentleman very politely explained to him the reason why they didn't do it. I'm sure Mr. O.C., you and Mr. Boxall both have been to that place they call Sunset House.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I only say this with great thanks to God in heaven. If I live to see the 19th day of September, I will be 91 years old.
Wow.
I was born on that property on September 19th, 1927.
Wow.
My mother was born on it on December 27th, 1892. And when that house was going to be built, since my grandfather was my great-grandfather was even in a high position in government. And he said to my grandfather, then my mother's father, "My old son, I'm giving you this piece of land, but it is so close to the sea that the road will need to be slipped further in, And many people, I'm sure Mr. O.C., your parents or grandparents remembered when it was called New Road. And the reason why it was called New Road was because it was really a new road built there. And in the back of where they call Sunset House was a big, what we call the sand hole. And it would always fill up with water in heavy rain or in a northwester. And it was from that big hole, Mr. O.C. and Mr. Bossall, that the soil was taken to build the road which they call New Road.
I remember that. I remember that hole there. I think they used to use it. Sunset used to use it, for initiation for divers as well when training. I'm not sure if it's still there.
Girls would get a little piece of wood and get a great big sail and sailboats in it and all that stuff. So people, God forgive me if it's wrong to say so, but I cannot have sympathy for people, especially born Caymanians, who practically build their houses in the sea. They know it should not be done. And may God have mercy on us. If we have even Ivan's baby brother come to visit us one of these days. And I pray and hope that people will wake up and older Caymanians would start talking to foreigners who come here to live or to build, and even to our own younger Cayman men and women who insist on building their houses. I call it in the water. God have mercy on us and keep us all safe. I already prayed for all the people on our 3 islands. And Mr. O.C., God bless you and your family, and Mr. Boxall, you too. And thanks for giving me all this time to do what I always call run up my mouth. Bye.
Thank you very much, Miss Georgia. Thanks again
Georgia.
for giving us that history. And like you said, more people need to know about it as well. I'm not too sure that the real estate companies in the Cayman Islands would be too happy about it, because those beachfront properties sell for lots and lots and lots of mullahs.
Yeah, but a lot of the old Caymanian houses as well. And it was very interesting to hear Miss Georgette. Were built on stilts. They were built elevated as well to permit the sea to kind of wash through and under the properties.
We're told, Simon, that the rain is coming down really heavy in the West Bay area as we speak as well. So we're asking all of the drivers in that area, please be extra careful when you're driving there as well. We know that the roads are nice and wide and people love to speed. Not the time to speed when you're driving in rainy weather as well. Also, one of our listeners wanted to know, said, sorry if I missed it, please tell me what's happening about today's launch of our coat of arms celebration. I believe that has been postponed until the 4th of June, which will be next week Monday. That has been postponed until next week Monday for that purpose as well. We're going to take a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue with Mr. Simon Boxall. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're talking about hurricane preparedness with Mr. Simon Boxall, who is the Acting Deputy Director for Preparedness at Hazard Management Cayman. One of our listeners has written in and said, being well insured is our strongest asset in natural disasters. And I agree with that to a point. I agree with that. And I would also add that being well insured, one of the most important components of being well insured is ensuring that we have reliable insurance companies that are going to be there, that are going to be prepared to honor the terms of their insurance agreements with the insurer when a natural disaster, when a claim is actually submitted, and not try to renege on it. We see it happen in the health insurance industry. We see it happen in the motor car insurance industry. We see it happening in the property insurance industry. When a claim is being made, then they tell you, did you read the terms and conditions? Those terms and conditions that are so fine that you can't even read them with a magnifying glass. So we have to ensure that we have reliable insurance companies that are going to be there when those claims are made as well. One caller, let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning. Orman up in the West Bay. How are you doing?
I'm fine, sir. How are you?
All right. Good morning to you and the rest of your panel there.
Morning.
I got a quick question. When we're talking about hurricane preparedness, I think one of the most, if it's not the most important things to know about a hurricane is information, accurate information. Now, how long has that weather station been out of action? Getting into a year, right?
You're talking about the radar station, the new Doppler radar station?
No, we're talking the radio station that used to give out the weather reports on a minute basis.
The weather
that
radio.
Continuous, yes, okay. Simon?
You know, and what happened to that?
I will have to find out. It's actually ran through the Cayman Islands National Weather Service, and I know that it did come up recently, but I'm not precisely sure. So I can't give you an answer to that. But it's a good question, and like you say, information is critical. So we should find out. I'll find out and make sure that I should hopefully get your number, and then I'll try to find out and make sure it should be working, and we'll work to ensure that it is.
Well, we haven't even had any information coming in between the time that has been out and now to update us and say what's the true position. And, frankly speaking, it's not good enough. I mean, you're talking about a weather station for the Cayman Islands. We should have a top-notch weather station at any given time, unless you have some maintenance to do. But here we are, we're not criticizing anyone, but we're talking about the weather in the hurricanes and so on and coming. And here we are. I mean, I'm a keen weather person, I watch moon phases and the tides and all that, and I'm amazed that we don't have this thing up and running again. So I just hope that you would take on board and get on with this thing so we can feel a little bit more satisfied that somebody has the interest of the Cayman Islands at heart. So I want to thank you very much, and if you need my number, it's 922-1086.
922-1086.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr.
Orman, for that.
And
Thank you.
we'll get on that.
Yeah. Along those lines as well, I've received another comment, and it has to do with, this is talking about public service announcements in general and lines of communications. It goes further than natural disasters. It talks about, government's communication in general. But I do know, and I do recall, that on one of your previous appearances on here, we spoke about the discussion actually was concerning announcements, especially when there were national emergencies, something occurred, and what was being worked on after the
January earthquake off Honduras, or the Sol fire?
The Soul Fire, yes. After
So
the Soul
an
Fire,
early
and there were
warnings.
various alerts that would be put in place as a result of
The
that.
notification system.
Notifications, yes.
Yes, we've been working on it for a while. It's in our legislation. Phase 1 is rolled out already with the radio alerts, radio interrupt system. So we're able now to interrupt radio. We're hoping soon to be able to place crawling text on cable television channels. And phase 2 and phase 3 are, I think it's actually going before the Cabinet or the National Security Council, one or the other, this week to try to budget the additional phases in the system. But we're hoping to have many different methods to be able to get messages out to the public. And one of those areas we hope eventually will be through cell broadcast, which will enable us to send messages directly to people's handsets, their phones, even cruise ship passengers, if their phone is on, even if it's on silent. We hope to be able to get messages, but there are costs attached, and it's not been fully budgeted yet. Negotiations are happening. Ofreg is involved, and we're not just going to rely simply on phones or radios or cable TV. We're looking at every different option, even police cars, the loud hailer systems on police vehicles, possibly even the screens that are on the side of the roads. We hope to have a robust and comprehensive system in place, and we haven't given up on it. Work continues. We're meeting with Ofreg, and we realize that it's something that's not just beneficial for hazard management Cayman Islands, like you said, Mr. Connor, but it could also possibly benefit the community and the police if we had missing persons, or if there's
those
some
amber alerts and
amber
things
alerts.
of that nature as
I
well.
mean,
Yes.
I think the public is stated that they expect a system like that, and government has so far followed through and funded at least phase 1. So we're just hoping that will continue. And it also came up in the meeting in Miami with the overseas territories, and we're hoping maybe to get some support from them as well. They're handing out some funding at this point, and possibly it's one of the areas where they may be able to tangibly show some support.
Okay. Now speaking again of the overseas territories, we saw the invaluable assistance that the Cayman Islands rendered in relation to the use of our helicopter, providing personnel, not only Cayman but Bermuda as well, providing personnel to our sisters and brothers in overseas territories as well. But have we firmed up any agreement within the territories in terms of assistance, or is it still an ad hoc arrangement? I'm going to ask you to answer that after we take this call, and we'll probably go to our 9 o'clock headline news after the call. But just keep that in mind, for me. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
We lost him.
I think we lost that caller. Okay, Simon.
Quickly, then, yes, we've been working on developing a rapid deployment team for the overseas territories. We saw, like you said, how useful it was for our helicopter. I think a radio Cayman technician went across to TCI and got that radio.
Yes.
Dean? Yep, Dean. He did a great job. And we're trying to develop that. We're also looking at SEDEMA as well, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, because they know how to integrate quite well into the disaster management offices. And we saw that, they're willing to send teams over, but the rapid deployment team is again something that came up in Miami. We'd like to establish teams from each of the overseas territories, maybe with different areas of experience. Maybe we'll have an earthquake response team that has telescoping cameras that can get underneath buildings. Maybe they would have a dog that can sniff out people in collapsed structures. But also the Bermuda Regiment was very useful.
Yes.
Cayman Airways is an incredible asset to bring to the table for a response, a relief and recovery operation. So, we're looking at maybe what Cayman can, and there may be some trainings going to occur to ensure that we do have a team in the overseas territories which can support each other should they be needed again, which inevitably they will be.
Okay.
So it's going to take an agreement on SEDEMA, a certain amount of funding, and the UK is looking, I think, at assisting in terms of providing I'm not sure exactly, but it's about $90,000 a year. I don't know whether that'll be something that they'll suggest the Cayman Islands government look at funding, or whether I don't know if they want an ongoing liability like that. So it's unlikely, I think, that the UK will continue to pay that. I'm not exactly sure. But we are looking at SEDEMA as well, because they did a great job in BVI. They sent a team, I think, 40 people. But I think when you're knocked down by an event, it's great to have a fresh group of people come as long as they're self-sufficient, as long as they're not adding to the burden, and as long as they can actually provide real assistance in tangible areas.
Exactly.
Like Dean did.
Yes.
From Radio Cayman.
Okay, we're going to take that break for our headline news at 9 o'clock. Folks, please stay tuned. When we return, we will continue with our conversation with Mr. Simon Boxall. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Mr. Simon Boxall, the Acting Deputy Director for Preparedness at Hazard Management Cayman. We're talking about hurricane preparedness, and as you all know by now, we've already had one subtropical storm for the year, and the season has not yet begun. It actually officially begins on the 1st of June. We had one caller holding on. We've asked that caller to call back. So when that caller calls back, we will have them online. In the meantime, Mr. Boxall, we have about half an hour left, and I know that you have an agenda and there are things that you want to talk about, that you want to get out into the public domain as well. So I want to give you an opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, O.C. I don't know. There we go. Thank you, O.C. Just, I'd like to encourage people to take steps to prepare again, as we always do, and most importantly, find a safe place to shelter if you're not sure that your home is able to withstand it. Food and water, flashlight. If you go on Cayman Prepared, if you're able to get access to the internet, you can see that there's loads of information on there. You can call us up. In the government building on the ground floor, there are these there's some documents, like a little magazine thing, a yellow magazine. It's got lots of great information in it. If you're new to the island, or ask your neighbors, older Caymanians, about the history in your area in terms of flooding. And if you've got medical conditions, you may want to go to one of those emergency medical centers that has a doctor and nurses on hand to assist if you have issues.
People should familiarize themselves with the location of shelters, hurricane shelters.
Location,
as well.
Exactly. We're really pleased. In a few days, we're going to graduate a CERT team in Cayman Brac, 52 members there, so that'll increase our capacity a little bit in the sister islands, and hopefully they'll be able to support Little Cayman as well, should they need support as well. So we're going to continue to develop these CERT teams, and we'll hopefully announce soon an opportunity for people, if they're interested in doing the training, which is totally free. You learn CPR, first aid, damage assessment, search and rescue, various disaster management things, and disaster psychology. It's a really good course, and the CPR and first aid, it's free. Normally there's a cost to attach to it, but not if you take part in the CERT program. So encourage people, if they can, when they hear us announce that, please join that training. But at the end of the day, you may not need a flashlight after the power goes out. You can survive without it, but you can't without food and water. And everybody, I don't know why people don't set aside a little bit of food and water. I think they can just handle it at the last moment or whatever. But
or the next day it'll all be
yeah,
available.
and they don't have space, and there's costs attached to it. But if you can set aside some food and water, I mean, that's unfortunately there's really not going to be anybody coming to hand out free food and free water so much in the aftermath of an event. And we saw last year the devastation in some of the other islands. They're still trying to recover from it. So the more you can do to prepare, whether that's putting your head up in the kind of attic, checking to see that the roof straps are still good, that the termites haven't got to it. It's probably a lot cheaper to do a little bit of work to shore up your roof now than
have to replace it.
have to replace it. Look about maybe even trimming back some of the trees that could topple down on top of your property. Don't chop them down to the roots, but just trim them back, because there's less surface area for the wind to blow them down. And just think about, if you do see a hurricane coming, start making water. Fill up plastic bags. Making ice. Fill up plastic bags like halfway full, and just tuck them into your freezer in different places. So, that'll keep your fridge and freezer cold for longer, and also provide you with a source of ice and water in the aftermath of if the power is out for a long period of time, because typically they will turn off the power at CUC to protect the grid at about hurricane force winds. So and we've seen in the past extended outages, so that's something to plan for. And you're going to need water, so that's a good way of having some fresh water in addition to keeping your whatever you got in your fridge and freezer cold for a while longer.
What about the use of generators, ensuring that you have one, and encouragement for those persons who can afford to, or who would be thinking of making the investment in having an auxiliary power supply, having either a generator powered by diesel or propane, preferably. Those are much cheaper than gasoline. Having them connected to their homes.
I mean, that would be an excellent solution. I mean, obviously they're quite expensive, but we've seen a lot of people now raising them up on pads as well to ensure that they're not kind of overcome by the salt water when the surge comes up. But if you can afford it, it's wonderful to be able to have light, and some people have even got systems that can power just about everything in their home. But it's great to be able to power your fridge, your freezer, and some lights, even if you don't end up having the air conditioning. Again, we have some recommendations for using generators.
Yes.
There's issues with...
We've seen some fatalities as a result, unfortunate.
People putting them in their garages, people worried that they're going to get stolen and stuff. They need to be outdoors, obviously, because they have a threat for carbon monoxide. And also people sometimes put the fuel in them without switching them off, and then they end up having fire situations, people getting burnt by trying to fill them when they're running. So we do have recommendations on generators as well, but it's a great solution to have a great backup if you can afford it.
Any planned collaborations with retailers, places like A.L. Thompson's, Cox, Uncle Bill's, Kirk's, in terms of demonstrations, specials, or anything like that for during the hurricane season?
Well, I don't know about during the hurricane season, but we've been going to the hardware stores the last couple of weekends. Uncle Bill's, like you said, Kirk's, L. Thompson's, Cost-U-Less, and they're putting together like preparedness kits, just showing people that it doesn't really take a huge amount of space, that you can get the basics in there, like a small fuel container, flashlight, garbage bags, some canned food, some water, some gloves, toilet paper, can opener. Some of the basics you can fit basically in a cooler. It's not going to take up a vast amount of space. And so we'll be back out there. I think next weekend We're going to be back at Costulas and Kirk's. We really appreciate it. Every year they, the hardware stores, they try to put together a kit for about $150, which I realize that's a lot of money for a lot of people, but you have to plan for it a little bit. But they put together these great kits, and then we actually they put their names in a draw. The people who enter to win one at the hardware stores, it's no cost to enter, and then we have somebody pick out a winner. Normally, the deputy governor picks out a winner for each of the kits by just reaching into the drawer and putting out a ticket. But it's now's the time to think about it if you haven't got your kit together now already.
Yeah, I think that caller has returned. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, OC, and good morning to your guest.
Good morning, ma'am.
Morning.
And it's very good information. I don't know if I'm just going to call you Mr. Simon.
That's fine.
Do you know, are you hazard management? I'm talking about, are you responsible for the dreams? And shouldn't it not be more dreams everywhere? Are you responsible for those?
Thank you for the call, ma'am. No, we're actually we're not responsible, and it's the National Roads Authority, I believe, who normally do it. And typically, we do see when this big first heavy rain at the beginning of the summer season. All the leaf litter, everything plugs up the drains, and you start standing water on the roads and stuff like that. But
because thank God, CUC has a maintenance team that they're. I have seen them for a long time now. They don't usually wait until on hurricane season is on top of us to do these things. So they go around and they chop down trees and in the line of wires and like poles and stuff like that. But personally, I would love to see more action from the people that is responsible for dreams, and I would love to see. But I'm putting OC on the spot right now.
Mm-hmm.
Since I'm not making any sense, or they're not hearing, or they're not listening. Most of all, they're not listening. This is long overdue for us down here in West Bay to have a hurricane center or emergency center, which could be used for many things. I've been on the radio many times about this, and it's become another hurricane season, and it's critical for us to have these things, just like everybody else has in other districts has emergency places or civic centers. We don't have any, and all we can use is church halls that is not equipped especially for the elderly or the handicapped, and the West Bay School Hall, which only has a capacity of 350 people, and we jammed 400 and odd people in there in Ivan. So our politicians is not listening. So, OC, could you talk them into something?
I certainly will do. My endeavor best to ensure that the topic remains live. Yes.
Okay, I thank you, and Mr. Simon. I don't know who's responsible for going to the schools, not to frighten the school children, but for emergencies and stuff. I guess that's the education department. I don't know, but that also should be done as well. And for you should repeat about what we have to get prepared with. I know because I was with the Red Cross, so I know what. But we have people down here in West Bay that can't afford it. Mental people sleeping in people garages and all that kind of thing, even on people's front porch. If you take a run down here, you can see it. But I thank you for your information, and I thank Radio Cayman because we can depend on them being on the radio updating us on what is happening with the weather and other things. Thank you for the information, and good morning, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you as well. We're going to take that last commercial break. Folks, please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Mr. Simon Boxall, who's the Acting Deputy Director for Preparedness at Hazard Management Cayman. And that caller had some very valid points. I think the National Roads Authority have been relatively proactive in terms of the clearance of drains and on the whole subject of having a center, a shelter, some sort of center, hurricane center for people in the district. And we know, of course, there's a beautiful one, I believe, in the Sister Islands in Cayman Brac. Good to have there. And we saw, the assistance that Cayman Brac was able to render to us here in Grand Cayman after Hurricane Ivan, as well. But it can be a costly proposition to have one in every district. Not talking about constituencies now, but in every district as well. Of course, it would have to be some multi-purpose building. But these are things that the government can look towards and see where they stand in terms of priority as well. Simon?
Yes. I think the caller raised a couple of very important and interesting points. I mean, we do know that there is, West Bay is one of the areas where there's probably more need for a shelter than possibly some other areas. There, as the caller pointed out, John Gray Memorial Church is one of the shelters, and John A. Cumber Primary School is a shelter and also emergency medical center. But there is not that much space in the shelters in West Bay. We'd like to see more. It is a recognized issue and a concern, and we continue to try to sort of improve and fill the gaps and address these issues, and the caller has certainly touched on one of those areas where we've recognized that there's a concern, and we also on the subject of NRA, I think you're right that they are fairly proactive, but they're proactive, but I think there are areas that are quite low-lying, and the water table's quite high, and it's really difficult sometimes for the hydraulic forces to kind of just get the water to drain away. It takes quite a lot of time, sometimes quite impermeable cap rock, and there are definitely areas that we repeatedly see flooding occurring in, and people call for additional drains to be dug and that kind of thing. But I think until we actually have like a main sewerage system that kind of pulls the standing water away, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a challenge, and obviously there's huge costs attached with putting in main sewerage. So I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's an increasing problem, especially as we fill in the kind of traditional swampy wetland areas that would kind of collect some of the water. As we continue to develop and grow, we're seeing increased areas of flooding, and it's a problem.
We have one more caller, but before we go to that caller, WhatsApp message as well. It says, "Good morning, panel, and to the panel. I would like to ask Hurricane Preparedness Committee if there are any thoughts or plans for families who have ill or disabled persons at home who rely heavily on utility power to keep their loved ones alive. I strongly believe that we should have a designated building for such persons, at least those families can know that they won't, that if they don't have a generator or permanent power backup settings, that they have somewhere to transport their loved ones to a safe place and a building that is well equipped for their medical needs. So again,
great point.
That's echoing sort of like what the other caller said, but in a more specific way to deal with persons with disabilities and illnesses.
Each district has an emergency medical center that has doctor, nurses on standby. But again, this is an area, is it time for us to look at building a special needs shelter? We're looking at a shelter for people with pets as well, because we recognize it's not just the pets. People are going to risk their lives. They don't want to leave their pets behind. So again, special needs is something that's coming up more and more, and we're realizing, wow, that's something we're going to have to look at. We continually try to grow and evolve and adapt and improve. And that caller has, again, raised a very important issue, and we've recognized it, and it's under discussion. It's something on the table, and again, government looks at their priorities in terms of funding and so on. And for, we hope that at some point, I think that the emergency centers do fulfill that need to a certain degree. We've got generators. We've increased the generating capacity. A lot of the shelters, there are doctors and nurses on standby, but
and we try to place them as strategically as possible too, to ensure that they can withstand.
In every single shelter. But the problem is there are people with quite severe mental health issues. These people, we're never going to turn anybody away from a shelter, but at a certain point, should we have a shelter that's more specifically designed to handle the needs of people that might have
special needs?
Yeah.
Okay. We have one caller. We're going to make this the last call for the morning. Two? We have two? Okay, two. So we're going to try to accommodate both of them, which means that each one is going to have to be as brief as possible. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Yes, sir, and I hear you have another call, so I'll try to be quick. Another very interesting program, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Billy.
Mr. O.C., and the cry is heard, but the politicians aren't listening. Our politicians want to take this country to 100,000 people as quickly as possible, regardless of the cost, social cost, and infrastructure cost on our people.
I would qualify that by saying some, because I don't think that this present government is pushing that agenda.
Oh, yes.
Really?
Our
okay.
Premier has said 100,000.
Okay.
And they are not doing anything to restrict it. They're encouraging more and more. Everybody arrives on a briefcase off the plane to build a 500-room hotel or whatever will be welcomed with open arms. And we're just not prepared. And our culture is suffering. And, as you drive around, as Miss Georgette rightly said, just drive along South Sound Road. Some condominiums are built below the level of the road, the floor. Some people have gone up high. But you see, when Mr. Kirk tried to get a development plan done starting in 2001, his fellow executive council members and now cabinet members did not support it. This is just another violation of our laws, because a lot of what Mr. McCleary, Frederick fought for, and what Simon and the rest of the people are fighting for is totally ignored by cabinet. And this is a sad thing. So we're paying for this department, but not getting the benefit of this department and what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a sad thing. You've expressed it too in some of what you've said, and I'm in total agreement. And it's time for the other politicians that haven't spoken out on this subject to start to demand that these considerations be put into place and we get a proper development plan for this country that would take care of most of these issues. And people are wanting NRA to come to drain wells. Well, if your well is below the level of the water, where's the water going to drain? Simon used this fancy word about hydraulic. That means if you live below sea level and houses are still built right on grade, And the grade is only in some places. I saw some up in Savannah the other day, 18 inches above the hole that's dug for the septic tank. That is total madness. And we are a crazy country, have not learned anything much from Ivan. Okay. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Last caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
A pleasant good morning to you, fine gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Same to you.
And I am very happy that Simon's on today, because I was going to try to reach that topic sometime before I just bring it up randomly or something. But I have a question I wanted to ask Simon personally, because I've never heard about it in my time being home, and then I do tune in from England when I'm there, and I've never heard it on any topic either. But I know that these days there are more different type of hazards and things that are risky to think about that we could possibly receive, like tsunamis or quakes, and because of all of the neighboring countries around us have suffered these things. What are the educational standards on that? I am concerned and worried, because I have tried from the time I had my two children, who's now 48 and 44 or 43, you tell them what to do in case of an earthquake or a tsunami would come, not to try to run away from who the group is so that they would perish or whatever. But I didn't know nothing about it myself, no more than trying to tell them like that, and try to stay down underneath your desk or stay somewhere where you wouldn't be crushed or killed directly right then. And I'm concerned because my grandkids, when I talk to them, they say, well, Nana, nobody has told us about it. What should we do? And I don't know what to really tell them either, because I've run out of thought process and listening to big countries, how they prepare for these things. I'm wondering, what is our educational standard on that, and what type of training are we emphasizing with teachers and educators and the public sector that would deal with the public in general?
Great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller, for that.
Thank
Simon?
you, caller. Well, last year we went to 17 schools and give presentations on hazard awareness. I think what you said about an earthquake, duck covering and hold, put your head under a desk or some sort of piece of furniture is the recommended action, and we recommend that just as many other governments do. And then you leave the building, go to an open area away from structures, poles, trees, anything that could potentially fall on you, and because there's a potential for aftershocks. But in terms of tsunami, we recognize that generally we're very low lying. The chances of a tsunami occurring are very small. But what we say is move away from coastal areas if you're on the beach or near the shoreline, and evacuate vertically if you can. Go up a floor, or think about where you live in terms of where your property is located or where you're working, and think about where you would go if there was a tsunami approaching, say in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or an hour. What are your options in terms of where you spend most of your time in terms of achieving a place where you can get up vertically. But we are in the schools. Obviously, at the moment, exams are taking place. So, we met with Mr. James Watler recently, and every year we try to push out the programs in the schools. Generally, we feel like when we go there, that the children and the students are quite aware of what to do in earthquakes. We have a booklet that we produced. We're not resting on our laurels for sure. We continue to try to emphasize the messages, and we hope it's for some it's almost automatic. They know if they feel the ground shaking below their feet, that they need to put their head underneath something to protect it. And then we do talk to the teachers, the principals, about possibly doing damage assessment, getting a facilities person into the property to make sure that it's safe for the students to re-enter it if it was a very strong shake. How we'd expect them to possibly listen to the radio to determine if a tsunami was coming after an earthquake. And we've been increasingly meeting with PTAs as well, parent-teacher associations. But it's definitely a work in progress, and we've been to all the Cayman Brac schools already this year, and we'll be rolling out the program in Grand Cayman in a month or two.
Okay, we've come to that time of the show. Anything in particular that you want to say in your closing comments, Simon?
Yeah, I would just, the government has recently funded a position for a hazard mitigation officer, which will look at a lot of the issues we're talking about, mapping of threats, the risks, the vulnerabilities, planning, looking forward. I think that's a very important positive step forward. They've been supportive in terms of the early warning system, the notification system. There's always work to be done. There's always ways we can improve. I had things today. Mr. Orman mentioned something that we can work on. But I think in terms of preparedness, please think about where you live. Be aware that the surge can come up, and we think it's possible even 15, 20 feet is possible. So think about how high your floor level is above sea level, and then add, if you're 10 feet above sea level, it's possible the sea could come 5 feet up the wall of your house. Be aware of these sorts of things. Listen to Radio Cayman when a threat is coming, and just be safe. Let's hopefully, make it through another hurricane season safe.
I'm going to put you on the spot just for one more thing, because it came up in your conversation. You talk about government's funding, for another position.
Right.
Coming up to graduation, high school graduations, college graduations,
Yes.
we're in basically in a hurricane belt.
Right.
We're facing climate change challenges, other areas of disaster management as well. If you notice those persons, like say, I would use Mr. McClure Frederick as an example. He would basically more in planning, building control unit,
Correct.
and everything else. Do we have any student, any person out there who's actually studied and specialized in disaster management? And what would we say to those persons who are graduating high school now in terms of looking at it, from a career standpoint?
Well, it's increasingly, yes, we do. We have Miss Teresita De Silva, who a young Caymanian, master's degree in disaster management.
Okay.
She's, and then just unfortunately, McKenna Scott, she had a disaster management degree. She left us to go and pursue teaching in the States. She got married. So yes, there are young Caymanians who are coming up through the ranks, realizing that there is a career in this area. There are many different aspects of it, whether, as you mentioned, building control, which is the path Mr. Frederick took, and planning, risk, insurance. There's a component of it for the insurance sector, but increasingly, countries are realizing that there's such big stakes involved in disasters. The losses can be so enormous potentially that really they have to plan and prepare and try to mitigate and be able to recover quickly. And so, yes, there are careers to be had. Every year we normally have an intern, and I think that there may be a process going on right now to look for a person to intern in hazard management. It's not an area I'm particularly involved in, but somebody else was talking about it in our office. But we encourage people to take an interest in this area, and I think it is something that more and more careers, it didn't exist when I was younger.
not to be.
Right, but it's an interesting area too.
Thank you very much, Simon, for being here. I want to really, really, thank you. At this stage, it's important that we continue to have this discussion. And I would also like to say to our listening and viewing audience that in the next few weeks, we also plan to have His Excellency the Governor on for the record to talk about the disaster preparedness as well. So we can certainly look forward to that for that person who inquired about the hierarchy as far as the hiring of Caymanians are concerned. If you go to the immigration website and you go on to laws and regulations, you will find the immigration regulations. And the regulations there talk about what the work permit board should be looking at in relation when they're considering a work permit for a company or for an individual, whether or not Caymanians have applied for it and everything else. It doesn't have to do with the hiring of a Caymanian, but with the consideration of a work permit. I think you may want to refer to, it's not called labor office anymore. I forget what it is called now, human resources or something, in that regard, in relation to the hierarchy. But the immigration regulations do speak to considerations that should be given when dealing with an application for a work permit. And for the person who spoke about Barbados, and I spoke about that as well. Just to point out to you that based on the Barbados Constitution, Senate consists of 21 persons who must be qualified for appointment. 12 senators to be appointed by the Governor General, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister by instrument under the public seal. 2 senators to be appointed by the Governor General, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition by instrument. In this case, we don't have a Leader of the Opposition, so the Prime Minister is now looking into amendments to the Constitution to remedy that situation. And also 7 senators to be appointed by the Governor General, acting in his discretion by instrument under the public seal. And those senators, 7 senators appointed by the Governor General, should represent religious, economic, or social interests, or such other interests as the Governor General considers ought to be represented. Folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension, For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles, as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want or even those who crave. I say to you, have a great day. Join Sterling Dwayne Ebanks. Actually, I will be guest hosting for Sterling Dwayne Ebanks this afternoon at 12:15, and we will have on the show representatives from the Department of Children and Family Services, and hopefully we will have some individuals also talking about Child Month activities as well. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these 3 beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.